1988, so I guess I've been emancipated for a damn long time. But for the rest of white folks, apparently we were unable to do that. I didn't know that that was true, but Obama has freed us. You see? And then, the best of all, the young man, a political blogger in Nashville, where I live, who says the reason he supports Obama is because, and this is deep, he says because Obama doesn't have the baggage of the civil rights movement. Let me suggest to you that when, as a nation, the civil rights movement, one of the greatest struggles for human liberation in the history of our collective species, can be likened to Samsonite, can be compared to luggage, to baggage, to something you would not want to carry around as if it were kryptonite and you were Superman. This thing that you would want to distance yourself from. So thank God Obama wasn't around for that. Thank God Obama wasn't in the streets of Birmingham. For how shameful would that have been? Thank God he wasn't in Mississippi in 1964, because there would be something wrong if he had that baggage. When we can compare the civil rights struggle with luggage and baggage, we are in a sad state of affairs, no matter how much of a cross-racial appeal this man may have. I would suggest to you that this entire language about transcending race is racist. And the reason it is racist is because it isn't even genuine. We're not talking about transcending race. We're saying that he has transcended his blackness. Because it's only blackness that has to ever be transcended. You see, we don't ask of white politicians that they transcend race. So in this campaign season where Obama is getting about half the white votes, but Senator Clinton is only getting about a quarter of the black votes, he's the one who has to transcend race. Now that's deep. Because if she's only getting 1/4 of the black votes and is relying almost entirely on white votes to put her where she is, why aren't we asking her to transcend her whiteness? The reason we don't is because whiteness is not something to be transcended. Don't you understand? Whiteness is not something to be ashamed of and to run from. But blackness is something that if you qualify for membership in the club, you best run away from it, and quickly. You need to overcome it. Blackness is to be overcome. Whiteness is to be achieved. Whiteness is a pinnacle, a standard that when you fall short of it, you get called when you're white trash. That is to say, you're white but not quite white. Whiteness isn't something to be run away from, to be transcended, to be overcome. It is something to be aspired to. Blackness is something one must leave behind. That is fundamentally racist. It implies when we say that this man has transcended his race, transcended blackness, whether we say it explicitly or only imply it, we are implying blackness is something negative. And so long as that is the case, as long as a black man has to pander to the sensibilities of a white audience and not talk about those things that would make us uncomfortable, that is confirmation of white power. It is confirmation of a system of white privilege. His success, given what has been required in order to achieve it, proves better than any other thing in this country where the actual seat of power resides. It isn't with this man of color. He can become the president of the United States only if white folks decide to make it true, and the only thing that will allow white folks to do so, it appears, is if we don't carry the baggage of the liberation struggle. What does it say about our political culture that this candidate, for whom I have a lot of respect, and again, none of what I'm saying is meant as a knock or a critique on him, but what does it say that he cannot mention the following things, which you would think in a presidential campaign where we're talking about important issues would be mentioned, but he can't mention them because to mention them will bring the charge of playing the race card and will cost him support. Oh, he talks about health care. All the candidates talk about health care, access and affordability, because that's a nice universal way to frame the issue, but they do not talk about the specific racial disparities and inequalities within health care. If they do talk about that, they only talk about it indirectly, as in black and brown folks, because they are on average have lower incomes, therefore have worse health outcomes. But the data of over 100 studies in the last decade suggests that the problems that black and brown folks face in health are not only related to access and affordability, they are the result of direct discriminatory treatment. Doctors, particularly white physicians, who treat their black and brown patients as mental and intellectual inferiors, who do not believe that they are capable of following a treatment regimen, who do not prescribe the same pain medicine for them, because they think that those individuals exaggerate their pain, who will not prescribe the same types of medical interventions for the very same types of health maladies that they would prescribe for whites. Over 100 studies confirm this, and none disconfirm it. And yet, to talk about racial discrimination against people of color who aren't even poor, see, because this is happening to people of color who are middle class, who are upper middle class, who are affluent, and are still subjected to discriminatory care, would be to play the race card, so we can't talk about it. And we can't talk about the dozen studies in the last 7 years which find that one of the most significantly correlated factors with excess hypertension rates in the black community, which are responsible for about 1/3 of the excess mortality in the black community relative to the white community, that one of the #1 factors most highly correlated with that excess hypertension is the experience that black people have with racial discrimination. That is to say that racism is a public health issue, and that is my phone ringing, so let me cut it off. I feel like Giuliani. But I'm not going to answer. But we can't talk about racism as a public health issue. We can't talk about racism being an issue that we have to look at independent of these other things, because then that won't be a universal appeal, so we can't discuss it. He can't talk about the fact that 2006, according to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, not 96, not 86, not 76, 2006, 2 years ago, was the year that, according to HUD, there were the highest number of race-based housing discrimination complaints on record against people of color. 2006, we talk about the housing crisis, the subprime loan crisis, the mortgage crisis, but not the specific racial elements of that. 2 to 3 million cases of race-based housing discrimination a year, according to government and private estimates. But we won't hear that on the campaign trail. Why not? That ought to be news. That ought to be a campaign issue. It's a crime. But we don't talk about it. We don't talk about, on the campaign trail, these candidates, none of them talk about racism in the job market. They all talk about creating jobs, because that's part of what presidential candidates do, talk about all the jobs they're going to create. But they don't talk about the discrimination that people of color face in the job market while they're trying to find those jobs. So they don't mention the study from 4 years ago from MIT and the University of Chicago, which found that job applicants with white-sounding names 50% more likely to get called back for an interview than job applicants with black-sounding names, even when all the qualifications are the same. Because to talk about that is to play the race card. To talk about that is to interject race into an arena where it didn't exist until you brought it up. White name folks, 50% more likely to get called back. That only proves two things. Number one, that there's ongoing barriers to people who are simply perceived as black. They just think that you're black. And that's enough to keep them from calling you back. That's number one. Number two, it goes a long way toward disproving all this nonsense about reverse discrimination as a significant national phenomenon, because God knows if that were the way it really went down in the job market, that study would have found the opposite. Having a black name would have been the thing that got you the call back. They could have gone in on Monday, opened up the envelope, the human resource director looks at the resume and says, "Hot damn, Tamika has applied for the job." Thank God! And Jamal sent in a resume. Oh, glory be. Called Jamal in. But now, what'd you say her name was? Skylar? Chloe? No. No. Becky? No. That's a white girl? No. Chip? Now he's white. But they don't talk about it. They don't talk about the study from Alfred and Ruth Blumrosen, two of the most well-respected legal scholars and researchers on the issue of race and discrimination, which a few years ago found that using a very conservative estimate of what constitutes race-based discrimination, even using a very limited definition, at least 1/3 of all businesses in the United States that are covered by civil rights law, 1/3 of those who have to obey the law regularly violate it, affecting up to 1.3 million job applicants of color a year. Why isn't that news? Why isn't that something that these candidates can discuss? Why can't they discuss the Justice Department report from 4 years ago? After all, whoever becomes president will appoint the Attorney General. They head up the Justice Department, so this seems relevant. And the Justice Department issues a report 4 years ago, finds what? That black and Latino males are 3 times more likely than white males to have their cars stopped and searched for drugs or other illegal contraband, even though, and stick with me, this is the important piece, even though white males are 4 times more likely to actually have the stuff in our cars on the occasion when we are stopped. 1/3 is likely to be stopped and searched, but 4 times more likely to be guilty on those occasions when we are. This suggests that racial profiling is not just racist, that's redundant. It is also fairly stupid law enforcement.